Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're jumping into some really potent source material. It's a sermon that unpacks the Bible, specifically looking at Acts chapter 18, verses 9 and 10.
Mm-hmm.
And our mission, our goal for this deep dive, is to explore this, well, kind of surprising moment of deep fear in the life of the Apostle Paul.
Yeah, someone you usually think of as totally fearless.
Exactly. And we want to discover, through this source, the three key ways he found the strength to, push through it.
And what that actually means for us, for you, when you're facing your own fears today.
It's a chance to see this giant of faith, wrestling with something so human, trembling fear.
And the source takes us right there, pulling out some really practical stuff, timeless principles, really.
Okay, let's dive in. So, Paul, we think unstoppable missionary, right?
That's the image, yeah.
But this source reminds us, leading up to Corinth, his journey was, well, anything but easy. He'd been physically beaten, thrown in prison back in Philippi.
Still recovering, probably. Still bearing those scars, physically and maybe mentally.
Yeah, and then in Thessalonica and Berea, intense opposition, persecution. Had to flee pretty quickly.
Right. Then that long trek south, 300 kilometers to Athens, often alone, separated from Silas and Timothy. You gotta imagine how exhausting that was.
Physically, mentally, just drained.
Definitely. And then he gets to Athens, the city of philosophers.
And the source notes he really gave it his all there, preached hard, reasoned with them.
But the results? Pretty minimal, huh? Mocked by some, only a few believers.
And even if numbers aren't everything, you pour yourself out like that, see so little. That's got to be discouraging, especially when you're already running on fumes.
No question. So it's in that state, weary, maybe kind of down, that he shows up in Corinth alone.
And the source paints this picture of Corinth. Huge city, bustling port where east meets west.
But notorious, infamous really, for its corruption, its decadence.
So much so that the phrase to be Corinthianized back then basically meant you were, well, morally depraved.
Wow. Yeah, the source mentions all the pagan worship, 12 temples, over 1,000 temple prostitutes. It's a heavy scene.
So Paul walks into that by himself, this massive, overwhelming, morally challenging place.
And the source points out the specific pressures. First, just the psychological intimidation, right? Walking into that huge, corrupt city alone.
Then money problems. He had to work, making tents, just to get by, a demanding job.
Yeah, so add physical fatigue on top of the mental and emotional strain.
And then comes the rejection. He's preaching, putting it out there. The Corinthians, they don't just disagree. They oppose him. They slander him.
And the source highlights that word slander. It means personal insult, personal attacks.
Oof, rejection's hard anytime, but when you're already feeling worn down and isolated.
It cuts deeper. Yeah, so all this stuff piles up.
And it leads to this moment of real, profound fear. The source points us straight to Paul's own words, 1 Corinthians 2:3. What did he say?
He said, I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling.
Not just worried, trembling, weak, afraid, overwhelmed.
It really grounds him, doesn't it? Makes him relatable.
Totally. It makes you think about those times in your own life, that feeling, fear of failure, fear of rejection, being ignored, attacked personally.
Or just that feeling when the problem looks way too big and you feel way too small. Fear of the unknown future.
It can be crippling, right? Freezes you, makes you feel stuck.
Absolutely. And that's the big question the source tackles. Paul felt all that, the trembling, the fear, yet he didn't quit.
No, he stayed. 18 months, his longest stay on that whole journey.
And the Corinthian church came out of it, one of the biggest, most influential churches. We have his letters to them.
Incredible. So how? How did he push through that fear? What were the secrets?
Okay, so the source digs into this. And the first big takeaway, the first secret, Paul found strength because he had the Lord's word.
Okay. How so?
Well, the source points directly to Acts 18, verses 9 and 10. God speaks right to Paul, like in the middle of this fear.
What does he say?
It's so direct. Do not be afraid. Simple as that. Then keep on speaking and do not be silent.
Wow. Keep going.
And then these anchors. For I am with you, and no one is going to attack and harm you.
That's powerful, direct assurance.
And the source argues this word, this message, it basically saved him. The fear started to lift when this word came.
But here's the interesting thing the source brings up. Didn't Paul already know God was with him? I mean, intellectually?
Exactly. Of course he knew it in his head. Like, we often know things, right? We know God is faithful, but we still feel terrified sometimes.
Yeah, why is that?
Because knowing it in your head, as theory, isn't the same as feeling it in your heart, in your soul. When it's just theory, the problems, the opponents, they still seem huge. Bigger, even.
Okay, so when does the fear actually go away then, according to the source?
It starts to dissolve when the word stops being just information and it speaks to you.
Yeah.
When it hits your soul, penetrates your spirit, when you feel its life.
Like it becomes real, active inside you.
Right. The source emphasizes the word has power, energy. It quotes that description from Hebrews,
Oh yeah, the living and active, sharper than any double-edged sword bit.
That's the one. Piercing, judging thoughts and attitudes. When that kind of light shines into the fearful corners of your soul, when you really grasp, the Lord is with me, that's when fear loses its grip.
It's not just head knowledge anymore.
No, it's heart knowledge, soul knowledge. And we see this pattern elsewhere, right? The source mentions other times God speaks to the fearful.
Like Joshua, be strong and courageous.
Exactly. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God will be with you. Or Isaiah. So do not fear, for I am with you. I will strengthen you and help you.
So it highlights how important it is to actually put ourselves in places where we can hear that word.
Definitely. Worship services, hearing preaching, personal quiet time, meditation, small groups, sharing and applying it together.
Okay, and the source brought up Psalm 119.1205, the word as a lamp.
Yeah, this is such a great insight. Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light for my path. A lamp, not a headlight.
What's the difference there?
A lamp shows you the next step, right where you are. It illuminates this moment, today's choices. It doesn't necessarily light up the whole road ahead, the distant future.
Oh, okay. Just enough light for the step you need to take right now.
Exactly. And the source asks, why not a headlight? Why doesn't God just show us everything?
Yeah, why not? Seems easier.
Well, maybe knowing it all would actually be harder. Focusing too much on way down the road, all the potential problems, it could actually paralyze us today, trip us up.
So we need the word for today's steps. Living faithfully today is how we get to tomorrow's purpose.
Right. It kind of connects to Jesus' teaching about not worrying about tomorrow, praying for daily bread. Our souls need that daily word.
That makes sense. The source used Joseph as an example too, right? Old Testament Joseph.
Incredible example. Sold into slavery, unjustly imprisoned. Talk about a fearful situation.
For sure.
But the point was, he wasn't obsessing about when will I get out or what's my grand future.
Yeah.
He focused on living faithfully today, right where he was. As a slave, as a prisoner.
He must have been afraid, though.
Oh, certainly. But he overcame it. And the source suggests the secret was the word sustaining him day by day. It points to that psalm, Psalm 105.
What does it say?
It describes Joseph's suffering until the time that his word came to pass. The word of the Lord tested or proved him.
Until the time. So God had given him promises, words, but the timing wasn't revealed yet.
Exactly. His job wasn't to figure out the cosmic schedule, but to live by the light he had for that day, trusting the word he'd received.
The source then connected this to some modern examples, didn't it? Something about a church and daily quiet time.
Yeah, mentioned a specific church practice using a book called Qthe for daily quiet time. Notice the positive impact over years, people engaged, sharing it, lives being changed.
Like someone finding the book in a cafe and joining the church.
Right, stories like that. And some creative acrostics they use, apparently, to remember principles about focusing on the word daily, finding peace today. Not by having all the future mapped out, it's about taking that next step faithfully.
Okay, so the word is crucial. What was the second secret the source uncovered?
The second reason Paul wasn't ultimately overcome by fear, he had the Lord's co-workers.
The people around him. Because
Yeah.
he rides alone, right? That was part of the problem.
Huge part of it. That isolation just feeds fear.
Mhm.
But God didn't leave him hanging. He brought people.
Like Aquila and Priscilla. How did they show up?
The source explains they'd been kicked out of Rome by Emperor Claudius, ended up in Corinth. Seems like a tough break for them.
But it was God's timing.
Exactly. Providence. They met Paul because they had the same trade tent making. But more than that, they were solid Christians and became amazing helpers in starting the church there.
And they stuck with him, did they? Traveled with him later?
They did, became real partners, and the source quotes Paul's praise for them in Romans. It's really moving.
What does he say?
Calls them fellow workers in Christ Jesus who risked their lives for him. Risked their lives. And he says all the Gentile churches were grateful to them.
Wow. To have people willing to risk everything for you. That sense of security of not being alone anymore.
Must have been immense. The source really emphasizes how that bond helped him feel secure.
Okay, so Aquila and Priscilla. Who else?
Then Silas and Timothy finally caught up with him. They arrived from Macedonia.
Must have been great to see them.
Huge boost, the source suggests. Just seeing familiar, friendly faces who shared the mission.
And did they bring something with them?
Yeah, they brought financial support from the churches up in Macedonia, like Philippi, Thessalonica, young churches themselves, but they were sending aid.
That's significant. What difference did that make?
Well, practically, our source explains, it meant Paul didn't have to spend all his time making tents anymore. Acts 18 says he could then devote himself completely to preaching.
Freed him up for the main task.
Right. But the source stresses it wasn't just about the money. Think about the encouragement. Knowing these young believers he'd poured into were now partnering with him, praying for him, supporting him financially. That fellowship.
That connection, even from far away. Yeah, I can see that.
And one more key person mentioned. Crispus. He was the leader of the synagogue.
Oh, that's a big deal.
Huge. He believed, along with his whole family. And the source notes this was like a catalyst. His conversion opened the door for many other Corinthians to hear and believe. A person of influence joining the team.
So the picture that emerges from the source is Paul starts alone and afraid, but God brings Aquila, Priscilla, Silas, Timothy, Crispus, this whole support network.
And as that community grew, his fear started to fade. He wasn't facing it alone anymore.
That's such a powerful takeaway for us, isn't it?
Absolutely. The source encourages us. Pray for good coworkers.
Yeah.
God won't leave you isolated. And just as importantly, recognize the coworkers you already have.
The people in your small group, your ministry team, your community.
They're gifts from God. And then there's the challenge. Be an Aquila or Priscilla for someone else. Be that support for someone who's struggling, who's afraid.
Step into that role.
Right.
The source shared some modern examples of that too, right?
Yeah, people praying for and becoming good mentors, elders, pastors, and that story about the person joining the church because they saw others just quietly serving, being faithful coworkers without needing the spotlight.
It really shows the power of that shared work, that mutual support, working together, armed with the word, serving humbly.
Exactly. That community aspect is vital.
Okay, so we've got the Lord's word, the Lord's coworkers. What was the third secret from the source for overcoming fear?
The third key insight, Paul wasn't ultimately afraid because he had an assigned mission.
The mission itself, going back to those words from God.
Right, back to Acts 18. Keep on speaking, for I have many people in this city. That last part is crucial.
I have many people in this city. Okay, how does that connect to mission?
Well, the source asks, who does God give a mission to? People he considers faithful, trustworthy.
Okay.
And this connects, fascinatingly, to Paul's own reflection in 1 Timothy chapter 1. Our source brings this in. Paul thanks Jesus for considering him faithful and appointing him to service.
Even
though, in Paul's own words, he was a former slanderer, persecutor, violent man. He says he received mercy because he acted in ignorance.
Wow. He owned his past.
Totally. But here's the really interesting link the source makes. Remember how Paul was being slandered in Corinth?
Yeah, those personal attacks.
The Greek word for slanderer Paul uses about his past self in 1 Timothy is the same word used in Acts for how the Corinthians were slandering him.
No way. Seriously.
Yeah. So the source suggests maybe as Paul was facing that slander, he thought, wait a minute, I used to be a slanderer. And God didn't reject me. He showed me mercy, considered me faithful, gave me this mission.
So maybe the people slandering him now.
Maybe they were also acting out of ignorance, just like he had. Maybe they needed the same grace, the same gospel he was bringing.
That understanding, that grace, it changes everything, doesn't it?
It reframes the opposition. And the source argues this realization that God considered him such a person, faithful and loved, and entrusted him with a mission that grace is what empowered him to get back up and keep going.
Because God believed in him, despite his past.
Exactly. And having that mission, that God-assigned task, it's transformative.
Yeah.
Our source teaches that if God gives you a mission, he takes responsibility for you until it's done.
He sees you through it.
Right. And when one part is finished, he guides you to the next stage, and it gives your life purpose. That's why Paul stayed 18 months, not just because he had support, but because he had a job to do there.
A specific mission for Corinth.
And think about the contrast the source highlights. Paul might have initially seen Corinth as just this awful, corrupt place to maybe preach quickly and leave.
Yeah, kind of get in and get out.
But God's perspective, I have many people in this city, people he had reserved, ready for the gospel. Paul wasn't there by accident. God sent him on this specific rescue mission. Hearing that must have set his heart pounding with purpose again.
Overcoming the fear with purpose.
Yes. And the connection for the listener, for you, is so important. Our source emphasizes you have a mission too. Every believer does.
You just need to discover it.
Discover it. Embrace it. Your role in church, that's a mission. But it's broader too.
Like where?
Your family may be sharing the gospel with relatives who don't believe. Your workplace representing Christ right there in the sphere God has placed you. Find your mission where you are.
The source used Daniel as an example too, right?
Powerful example. Dragged off to Babylon, nation destroyed, foreign land. Definitely scary.
For sure.
But Daniel and his friends, they found their mission there. Resolved not to compromise, refused to bow down, face the furnace, the lion's den.
But they weren't paralyzed by fear.
No, because they were focused on fulfilling the mission God gave them in that place during that exile.
And Esther, facing Haman's plot.
Same thing, risking her life to go to the king. But Mordecai's words helped her see it. Who knows? Maybe you came to the kingdom for such a time as this.
That clicked for her. She saw her mission.
It seems so, because once she grasped that, the fear didn't stop her. She made that incredible declaration the source quotes, "I will go to the king, and if I perish, I perish."
Wow. Mission over fear.
Once she recognized her mission, the fear didn't paralyze her. She moved into action.
So whether it's Paul, Joseph, Daniel, Esther, the source shows recognizing that God-given mission is key to pushing past fear.
Absolutely. It concludes this section with that repeated line, "Fear nothing at all. Do not be afraid. Do not be dismayed."
Okay, so 3 powerful secrets from this deep dive into the source material.
Yeah, really practical stuff.
We saw Paul trembling and afraid in Corinth, but he overcame it through 1, the power of the Lord's word speaking directly to his soul.
2, the strength and support of the Lord's co-workers who came alongside him.
And 3, the clarity and purpose that came from embracing his assigned mission from God for that specific city.
It reminds us that fear is normal. It's human, even for giants of faith.
Yeah, but the source gives us these handles, these divine resources, not necessarily to eliminate fear, but to move through it, to act despite it.
Finding strength in the word, in community, and in purpose.
And we talked about that really neat analogy. The source used God's word being a lamp for your feet, not a headlight.
Right, showing you just the next step, today's step, rather than the whole unknown road ahead.
And the source kind of suggested that maybe trying too hard to see the whole future, trying to control it, actually makes things harder, trips us up right now.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on, doesn't it?
Yeah. What if that uncertainty about tomorrow? What if it isn't God holding back information we desperately need?
What if instead it's an invitation?
An invitation to just live fully, live faithfully based on the light he gives you for today, for this next step.
So consider this. How might embracing that, focusing on the present, trusting God with just the next step he illuminates, how might that change your whole approach to your own fears, your own uncertainties about what's coming